everybody, it's Paige Evans. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a minute. I didn't mean to take a 2-month break, but I was displaced from my scrap room for a while, and here we are, we're back. Now, this layout was 1001% inspired by these beautiful textured cards from my design team member, Joka Marco. Now, you need to give her a follow. I will leave a link to her Instagram and YouTube video below in the description. This layout starts with 2 of the same pattern paper. It is paper 11 from my Go the Scenic Route collection, and from one of the papers I am trimming out the center 4 circles using a paper cutter, and then from the second piece of paper I am going to use a 2-inch punch and punch out the circles and then the petals. So by just using the edge of the circle, you can use it to cut out all of the petals from all of the circles. These circles are exactly 2 inches, and so the 2-inch circle punch is the exact tool that you need to punch out these petals. Or if you don't have a 2-inch circle punch, which I will leave a link to below, you can fussy cut, and that's a great way to do this too. However, a punch definitely saves some time, lots of time. So punching out the circles and then using just the edge to punch out all of the petals. I'm trying to be as careful as I can about getting the exact shape, and then once you've done a whole row, you'll need to trim off some of the excess so that you can use the circle punch to continue punching along and save those scraps. I think that the interesting star shapes that it makes in between these petals and circles would make another really interesting layout. So then you can either punch one circle at a time and work on it one petal, one circle at a time, or you can punch out all of the circles at the same time and then just place them on top of that first pattern paper in the order that they go and work on them that way. It might be a little faster to do it assembly line style like this. So punch the circles. You get to skip over 4 of the circles in the middle because we're creating a frame design. And it's really handy that these circles are exactly 2 inches, because a 2-inch circle punch isn't rare. You can find them at probably Michael's, Joann's, online. The one I've listed below is available at scrapbook.com. So punch the circles, punch the petals. It took probably an hour to do this step, just punching out all of these little pieces. Ta-da! Okay, on to the next step. We are going to lightly attach all of the petals in place using just a little dab of adhesive, because the next step is machine stitching everything in place, and it would be impossible to stitch them all down without adhering them first. And I have noticed that the more adhesive I use while I'm machine stitching, it tends to gum up the needle, so the smallest amount of adhesive as possible. And then again, assembly line style, working on an entire row at a time and then putting them back in place in the exact same spot as the original pattern paper. Here we go. This is what it looks like so far. Not much to look at yet, but once we add the stitching and fold up the petals, it's going to look amazing and super cool. So let's go to the next step, which is machine stitching. I have a Brother sewing machine that I got at Walmart, I want to say over a dozen years ago now, and it still works like a charm. I only use it on paper. Rarely do I ever use this on fabric. I'm using a basic running stitch and white thread and stitching through the centers of all the petals. So it's diagonal lines, and I'll show you what this looks like from a different angle instead of right from the top, because you can't really see what I'm doing. But once you get to the end, you rotate the paper and start working on the next row of petals. So here we stitch along this diagonal line of petals, rotate, and then stitch along the next line of diagonal petals, and it's just kind of crisscrossing back and forth, and you rotate across the entire frame. once you're finished machine stitching, you can trim off any excess threads that are hanging loose on the edges. And then it's time to add the dimension. So I'm using a palette knife. You could use your fingers or some other tool, but I have found that this palette knife works really well for this part. So you put it underneath one of the petals, bend it up, and do that to the entire background. And this completes the quilted background, and I'll show it up close what it looks like. I just love the texture. I love the dimension. I love all the color, the shadows, the depth. They remind me of flowers. It reminds me of a quilt again. So I just really love this. Again, 1001% inspired by Joka and how she did this to her cards for my design team. So I took the idea for cards and I turned it into a layout, and I'm just grateful with how it inspired me. I am taking a piece of scratch cardstock. I had started to do some foiling on this piece so I can save that flower for later. Just cutting it out, and I'll add adhesive onto the back side of the frame and put it on top of this piece of cardstock. I'm going to use a photo of Jane having a virtual play date on her bed, which is on a quilt, so that just kind of goes hand in hand with this quilt-like background. And the title is going to be Virtual Playdate, and I'm using a mix of these puffy word stickers. So I have one package of these stickers to use as is, and then another package to mix and match them to create my own words and titles. And I am adding them onto the photo. So I put them on a piece of transparency, just part of the package first, because once these stick onto my photos, there's no turning back. It's there for good. So by putting them on that transparency, I was able to move them around to figure out the exact placement before putting them on the photo. This flag paper clip has the same pattern as the background paper, so I tucked that onto the side. And then to incorporate the journaling into the overall design, I am journaling around the border of the photo using a light blue pen so it matches, and just writing about how interesting this year is. Finishing up with a trio of floral cardstock stickers, and this kind of creates a nice visual triangle on the photo with the cluster of flowers, the flag paperclip, and the title. No other embellishing is needed for this layout. Here it is finished. Again, loving the texture and the dimension created by this pattern paper and punching out the petals. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and hope to see you again real soon.